I've been a part of this church, part of LSCC, since I was short. So I've been here for quite a few years. I graduated from NMU a long time ago, with a degree in art and design, and came on staff a couple years ago as a tech and media director. More recently, I've come alongside Chris and a lot of volunteers that you see around the room to help lead the Awaken youth group. And I've had the privilege of watching them grow as musicians and as leaders, and I think they did an absolutely amazing job this morning, so let's give them another hand. This week, I get to switch gears just a little bit and finish off our series in Esther. Now, I love when things get a little bit weird, so it's probably why I love this book so much. It has a lot of elements that you would never expect from a book in the Bible. For one, the book doesn't mention the name of God even once. The main character is a girl who's a little less than well-behaved, and the whole book uses party after party to introduce a party that never stops. And when it comes to Haman, there's this underlying theme that karma is a big stinker. But one important thing to note in this book is that everything builds, hinges, and resolves based on the concept of celebration. And that's our focus for today. And the timing could not be better. As I'm sure most of you know, because somebody spilled the beans. I'm looking at you, Corey, if you're in here. But a couple weeks ago, I asked Kate to marry me, and she said yes. So now that she's agreed to become Mrs. Aho, the planning is underway, and like I said, the timing couldn't be better. We've been thinking a lot about celebration, and today we're focusing on celebration in the book of Esther. As tradition goes, if we skip to the end of the book, I almost missed the most important part. If you skip to the end of the book, you'll find that the whole reason that this book exists is to explain a Jewish tradition. It's called the Festival of Purim. And as the tradition goes, when you begin the celebration, the Jewish people would gather together and read the story of Esther. And the kids have a very, very important role in this. Do you guys think you can help me out here? Okay, the tradition is called the clopping Haman. Now, Haman is the bad guy in this story. So every time you hear me say the name Haman, I need you to do this. Boo! You think you can help me with this? Yeah. Let's try it. Haman. Oh my goodness. Is that it? Okay, I need you to get a little, but you got to yell and scream too. Let's try one more time. Haman. There we go. I like it. Okay. Now you guys have to pay very, very close attention because this is a very, very important part of this lesson. Since everything in the book of Esther hinges on celebration to move the story forward, let's do a quick recap and look at the story again through the lens of celebration. The story starts off with two feasts. Within this time, King Xerxes gets a little bit schwasty, and he gives Queen Vashti the boot when she upsets him. After he's had some time to cool off, he decides he needs a new queen, a better queen. This is where we meet Esther and Mordecai. When she's named queen, the king throws another celebration. So there are celebrations to usher out Queen Vashti and another celebration to introduce the new queen, Esther. After some time, Esther finds out that Haman, he is planning to wipe out the entire Jewish race. No, that's her people. Mordecai compels her to do anything she can to save her people. So what was her plan? Party time. So as we can see, another celebration means another change of events. Now, Esther is crafty. She uses this feast to butter up the king, and he offers her anything she wants, up to half the kingdom. This might be a little bit snaky, but it's totally working. After the celebration, she invited the king and Haman back for another celebration. In the meantime, he left in high spirits, but it didn't take long for his pride to get the best of him. Mordecai wouldn't bow before him, so he planned to have Mordecai killed. Little did he know that Mordecai did some amazing things for the king, so the king asked Haman to honor him. So he was humiliated. Okay, so now that the king is all buttered up and has promised to give Esther anything she wants, the next celebration begins. She uses this celebration to expose Haman and his evil plot to destroy the Jewish people. This also allows Esther and Mordecai to issue a decree that allows the Jewish people to fight back. And as we know, that ultimately saved their people. So just as the entire story of Esther unfolded using celebration, so the story ends. But it also continues. So up until this point, Mordecai and Esther have been honored, the Jewish people prevail, and Haman receives his justice. So this is where we pick up the story again in chapter 9, starting in verse 17. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. Skipping to verse 20. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews through the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned to joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe these days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. See, it was important for these people to remember that they faced Haman and his evil plan to wipe out their people. It is important for them to remember the times when things looked like they couldn't get any worse. It is important for us to remember the hard times that we've gone through, the evils that we've faced. It was important for them to remember that. It is equally important, however, that this wasn't their focus. As the time the Jews got relief from their enemies. Mordecai sent a letter to all the Jews to tell future generations of what happened to them, not so they can dwell in the past or burn with rage towards Haman. You guys are slacking here, come on. Instead, it was so they could celebrate God's deliverance when their sorrow was turned to joy, when their mourning was turned to celebration. They weren't stuck dwelling on the past or the wrong that was done to them. It's so easy for me to get stuck in the past, friends that have hurt me, family that has done wrong, or maybe even the hurt that I've caused other people. But we can't forget to celebrate God's power and his plan. We should celebrate what he did through Esther and what he can do through you. If God is powerful enough to save that entire people, he's certainly strong enough to save us. Amen? Another focus of the celebration of Purim was honoring God for orchestrating his deliverance, praising him for controlling even the smallest, most seemingly insignificant details. In researching Purim, I found this article from Shabbat.org that expresses this idea a whole lot more eloquently than I could. It says, in addition to the Jewish miracle, to the miracle of Jewish survival, despite the efforts of our enemies, Purim celebrates God's intimate involvement in every aspect of this world, even though there were no overt miracles recorded in the book of Esther. Indeed, his name is not even mentioned once. God was actively pulling the strings to care for his nation. So let's not forget or doubt for even a moment that God is in control, even when we don't see it. Our perspective is limited. Romans 8 encourages us again in this, where it says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And I want you to notice that it does not say for the comfort or the convenience, but for the good. When Esther issued that decree, it didn't simply make everything okay. It allowed the Jews to fight back. And that's what they had to do. And they fought, and it hurt, and it was difficult, but God saved them. So even when we can't directly see what God is doing and how he's working and how he's orchestrating things, just like in the story of Esther, let's continue to honor God and worship him for being in control. Picking up the story again, starting in verse 26, we read, "Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen, and what had happened to them, the Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who would join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation, by every family, and in every city, and in every province." Come on. You guys aren't paying attention. "And the days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants." These people started a tradition of celebration because of what happened to them. When God redeemed them, they had two choices. They can sit and sulk in the evil plans of Haman, or they could celebrate God's deliverance when their mourning was turned to celebration. Similar to how the Jews took it on themselves to celebrate, we have the same opportunity to celebrate and worship continually. Not just every year during the celebration of Purim, but every week that we're here in service. And every day in our lives, we have the opportunity to worship God because of what happened to us. And we get to continue in joy. It is all too common, and I'm including myself when I say this, to approach worship from a purely contemplative, sullen, low place. And don't get me wrong, there's a time for that as well. But when the Jews defeated the Amalekites, do you think they just stood there and said, "Man, we were almost defeated. That guy's evil, Haman." No, their response was to party. Joy and fun was a must. That was the way they remembered what God had done for them. That was the way they honored God. That is the way they worshiped him. What if we approached birthdays like we do worship sometimes? Does that tell someone that you're excited that they're your friend? That you're happy for them? Does that create any excitement? No, that starts to sound like, Mike, I've been noticing you getting older lately. I think you should stop. That's insane, right? No, for birthdays, we bring out the noisemakers, we bake a cake, we bump out music, we get excited all for that birthday boy or that birthday girl. Right? What if we approached worship a little more like that? What if our worship looked less like, "I once was lost," but it looked more like, "But God, now I am found"? What if our worship focused a little less on the evil plans from people like Haman and looked more like the joy that we find in God's redemption and his deliverance? What if we continued to worship God with that kind of joy and passion? I'm not suggesting that we go through Econo singing our hearts out. That might be a little bit weird. But what if that joy we had affected everything we did? What if we passed that on to our kids and our family? And that started to affect our community and our coworkers, our neighbors. So I'm going to challenge you, along with myself, to take it upon yourselves, just like the Jews in the story of Esther, to never fail to celebrate, that we may remember what God has done, that we may pass it on, and that we may honor God and worship continually. And now, Chris is going to come up and continue that thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.